If you take a look at with rates going up, $1 million home a few months ago, let's say February, so $1 million home, 20% down payment, 2.5% interest rate, it works out to be about $3,500 in a monthly expense. You compare that to an $800,000 purchase with 20% down, with a 5% interest rate, which is more or less where rates are at now. The average expense is closer to $3,900 a month. So.
Welcome to another episode of Here We Grow, and today I'm very excited to have my good buddy Brandon O'Quinn on. So the whole gist of this podcast, I'm not sure how much you've seen it, but has been people with the growth mindset. It's like Here We Grow is a saying around here. And, you know, I think that I've said this on pretty well every podcast, but I think that if you're not growing, you're dying. And you have to have a competitive mindset in our business, obviously. And so we'll talk about it in a bit about like your hockey background and stuff like that. But a couple stats on this guy. So he's been in the business for 3 years with over 140 units sold already, which is like a huge accomplishment. You said that to me on the phone and I was like, oh, cool. And then I'm like, okay, in 3 years, that's a shit ton of units. So good on you. And you also have picked up a few income properties, which we'll talk about too. But something cool that we have in common is obviously we're right around the same age, and both of us have parents that have been in the business for like literally almost the same amount of time, right? So you said it's your mom, right? Your mom's in the business, been on the Chairman's Club, you said, for 14 years.
This will be year 13 or year 14. It's
what's the Chairman's Club? That's a Royal LePage thing, right?
So basically it's within Royal LePage. I won't talk about or pump the tires of Royal LePage as a company, obviously.
We'll cover this out. Go ahead.
But it's if you're in top 1% in all of Royal LePage across Canada, which now I believe there's just over 20,000 agents,
right,
then you get the accolade of being a part of Chairman's Club. So wow. It's been this will be 13 or 14 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild. Yeah. That's cool that like hasn't skipped a beat 1 year either. That's a big accomplishment. So
appreciate it. Thanks.
So talk about getting into real estate, because I think that a lot of people one of the podcasts we're talking, it seems like some people think this is like selling sunset, and it absolutely is not. Couldn't be further from it. So obviously, I mean, with your mom being in the business, was real estate always the end goal? I know you said you were doing mortgages and stuff before. Talk about that and how you made the decision to get into real estate.
So, no, it wasn't clear to me right away that I would end up joining real estate. I kind of, was preoccupied with hockey, didn't put a lot of thought into what I would end up doing. And I think I was around 19 years old when I was still playing junior. I, started getting into some business books, best-selling books, and always kind of had my mom, gently pushing me along to try and follow more of an entrepreneurship side, right, compared to my dad, who was in the military. I actually spent a little time at CFB Kingston. And he was more, get a job, get a summer job, start making the hourly wage and that sort of thing. Whereas my mom always encouraged me to think a little bit bigger and take a little bit of risk. So, actually speaking of talking about entrepreneurship, there was, I had a lawn business when I was 18, lawn aeration business when I think it was 20. Ended up selling things like hockey sticks in bulk, a few separate things like that. And then, it really wasn't until I finished up playing junior A actually in Kingston and, reading some business books, getting a little more switched on with that, and always wondering, like, how can I make money? I get to read these Forbes articles with some, these kids in elementary school having $1 million businesses, or, people buying things in bulk, selling it for more expensive, making a profit. And I always thought, like, what could I do to make some money while I'm still in school? Because as a junior hockey player, not going to school directly out of high school, you got a few years off and then you end up being a little older than most people in university. Right. So, and already having a bit of that entrepreneurship experience. One day it kind of hit me that, hey, as a mom that's a top producing real estate, and then a lot of mortgage advisors or people at the bank are, always looking to get her business. The guy who owned my junior A hockey team was Al Patterson, a fella from Mortgage Professionals in Kingston, and worked out a deal with him where I would get a piece of the pie of every commission as long as I got my mortgage course done. So I was technically, I think, an unlicensed assistant, but I was getting a piece of pie of every deal that my mom would refer over to him. So it was kind of, a win-win-win all around. It was good for him because it was business he otherwise wouldn't have had. It was good for me because I got to learn the back end of, financing, also make some money for myself. And it was good for my mom because, her son got a little bit of money. And
that gentle push finally paid off.
That's right.
Or started to pay off.
It was getting there. Yeah. And so I guess that was where I realized, between understanding financing, going to some investing seminars, I really understood that, I knew a lot more than I ever realized being around real estate my whole life. And then secondly, that you can, if you put a lot of work ethic into it, and take advantage of the opportunities that are around you, that you can have be quite successful. So that's kind of where it turned for me.
So like you just threw out a comment that made me think of this too, is you said like being around real estate your whole life, like you feel like you know it, right? How much did the courses throw you for a loop where you're like, this has nothing to do with real estate?
Listen, man. So I actually, because my mom being an agent, a lot of times when I wasn't wrapping my head around a certain concept, I would go to her and ask her. And what I found out was that it actually, confused me and put me further away from being able to get the answers that within the course they were looking for. Right. So it's certainly, you got to do it to get your credentials, but
it's not all that relevant, unfortunately.
I agree.
They're putting you through the ringer though. It's like one of those things where it's like they just make it really hard, so you have to do something to get in. It's not necessarily like the best practice. However, I don't know if you were doing it because 3 years ago, I don't know if they had started. Were you with Humber?
No.
Okay, yeah. So they did it. They started doing it with Humber, and apparently it's been a bit better. And the one thing they do is they throw you into scenarios and stuff and whatever. So apparently that's been better. But so getting into real estate, obviously similar to me, you had a little bit of background and you've seen what the real estate industry looked like. Was there any surprises for you getting into the business, for better or worse? Like we were talking before the podcast, and I said my thing was like I didn't realize how much effort it was going to take to get my business going. I had an idea of what it took to be successful in this business, but to get the ball rolling in order to get to referrals and everything else, I was like, man, this is a lot of work, right? So is there anything that shocked you, or?
Not really. I mean, you always don't know fully what to expect. First being around it gives you a bit of an advantage. And second of all, having, a high producing, family member that's had a team gives you a bit of that good fortune that you can get some deals that trickle down to you, where some new agents don't have that luxury. But certainly it's not like everything was handed. You still need to put in the hours. I think one thing is once you finish, like you said, the course isn't very relevant in our opinion as to what you actually do on a day-to-day basis. But there's no path, there's no roadmap, there's no like, hey, you do this, and then there's this. It's unique to every, personality you're dealing with. 100%. And it's unique to the personality of the agent themselves too. So that's one of the beauties about real estate is it, in my opinion, is pure entrepreneurship because, some people are doing A, B, C to get to X. Some people are doing A, M, N, whatever. And it's all customized. And I think a lot of, for new agents, of what can help them become successful is not always trying to reinvent the wheel.
Like, 100%. That's 100%.
There's a lot of old strategies that really work well. But what you can do is you can take a strategy that's, being taught by real estate coaches decades ago, and you can actually just use the same thing, but you can customize it a little bit more. And then, I got a good example of that we could talk about after an hour or whatever.
Get into it. What do you got?
Well, one of the things that I think is great, real estate, CMAs, like kind of health checks. So, when we talk about
CMA means like property evaluation for any non-realtors watching. Carry on. CMAs,
And, one of the things to be successful in real estate, I think a lot of people are always looking for new leads. And, there's a market for that. There's, but one thing with, my family that sells in Brighton, Belleville, Trenton, and the surrounding areas. Trenton's also known as Quinte West. We've been, I don't know if we spent a cent on advertising this year. I don't know if, my mom's probably over her last 21 years in the business, which has been quite successful. We don't advertise. And a big part of what we do is just we go back to clients. When you look at the stats of where new deals come from, a large portion is just word of mouth, like referrals from past clients. And like when you break down, what comes from social media, things like that, like clearly you've had some success in that. But a lot of it is going back to the same people that you've dealt with before, and providing them value on a continuous basis. Like the relationship's not over as soon as they, their house closes, whether they're buying or they're selling. But if anything, it's just beginning. Now, some people move out of town. That's a little trickier. But without kind of going on and talking in circles around it, one of the things that I learned that I know has been going around, agents have been doing for decades, is touching base with clients that live locally that you've already sold a house to let them know, hey, this is what's happening in the market. here's, 2, 3, 4 houses that have sold that are directly comparable to yours within a recent time frame. And without explaining, hey, yours is worth this, just saying like, look, this is your real estate health check. You go see your doctor twice a year, your dentist twice a year. Might as well talk to your favorite realtor to get an idea what's happening in the market. And a lot of people have done it, but for me, I've thought it was a great idea, but I'll use screen share video software built into my email called BombBomb. There's Loom, there's several other softwares like it. And I'll send that out once a year. And it's fairly time consuming, but the amount of value that and deals that came out of that, it's like, wow.
Yeah, it's keeping, I think part of like, so you said so many good things there. I was writing them down as you're going. So the one thing you started off was like, don't reinvent the wheel, which I think is so important. Like, good artists copy, great artists steal. There's so many other people out there that have done this, and they have the blueprint to success. You just watch what they're doing. And like you said, you can do your own way and put your own spin on it, but people have already figured this out. There's already successful people in the business that have figured these types of things out, like you're talking about. But I think it's so important to, and I'm like, 100%, I've done this where I've let people go, unfortunately, because I didn't give them value after the transaction. Because we heard this stat recently where every transaction that a realtor does should represent 5.7 transactions over the course of that customer's life. Whether it's referrals from their family, themselves moving again. Most people move like probably 4 times in their lifetime. I would think a lot more people move more frequently now. But we can get so caught up in like chasing new business because it's exciting. You forget about taking care of the business you already have. And one of the things that I didn't realize in the first 3 years was how important that was. And when I finally started getting referrals, it was like, oh, like this is a lot easier because people want to do business with people they know, like, and trust. And if you get a good word from somebody else that they trust, you're so much more likely to do business with somebody. If I'm looking for a contractor to build a fireplace in my, house, and I've already seen a fireplace at somebody else's house that's been built, they said they did a great job, they had a great experience with that person, I'm not calling anyone else. My friend already told me they're good, right? So, and it's so much easier, makes the transaction go so much better, because I also think the number one thing we need in this business is trust. Nobody trusts realtors, right? We have that like stigma of being like a used car salesman or whatever, right?
So that's a great point. And just to kind of add on to your points, but you're exactly right. You already have a bit of rapport built with that new person you haven't met before if they were referred to you by somebody else. The other thing that I noticed too, if you're dealing with good people appreciate you, it's a good relationship, and you like that person. If you get a referral from them, not always, but most likely they're somewhat similar personalities, because people will look to other people that they are similar to them and similar values, that sort of thing, to listen to their opinions. So chances are, if you get a good client that refers you, they're probably going to be a pretty good dude too. And that can work in the opposite way too. Yeah.
Which makes your life a little bit less stressful too. Yeah. Because we deal with very different personalities on a daily basis, and we've been put in some very interesting situations. So that's what I was going to kick you to next. I'm sure that in your 3 years in the business, you've seen some crazy shit. We've told some crazy stories on the podcast already, but is there anything that has happened to you over those 3 years that you're like, man, did not expect to be seeing this when I got into real estate or when I got my license?
Between talking to other realtors too, having a family that's in it, there's certainly some interesting stories that I've heard, and some that just kind of leave you scratching your head and wondering how someone could come to that. But hey, the world's full of different personalities, and right. But there was one, and I got to be careful when I'm saying this, because I'm very compassionate to what happened to this client. Very good people, but it's something when it's speaking of things you don't expect to have happen as a realtor. So I had this couple last year. They were a really nice Asian couple. I'm not going to say names for obvious reasons, and they were coming down from Scarborough, like a lot of people moving down to the more affordable areas east of the city. And I showed them a few properties one day, and then we set up a few for, next week, something like that. Now this is going back to last year. And the one thing is, they were an older couple. I think the wife had arthritis. And most people, retirees, let's say, are looking for places that are true bungalows, not always side splits, multi-level splits, because the stairs, and it's been tough on the knees and the hips. And a lot of properties they were looking at were multi-level splits. And so anyways, I showed him about 4 properties. The last one was actually our listing as well. And the lady for the listing, I got along great with her, but she was an interesting lady and kind of had, some depression and anxiety. And I remember her talking about her sciatic nerve going down to her ass, and, and nobody said on my stuff. It's the middle of COVID here.
Right.
And, very diligent, very, very anal. Like, I think somebody sat on the bed, there's a wrinkle in it.
Right.
So I'm already keeping that in mind.
Right.
So, I walk into the house, and the husband forgot his mask, so he ran out to the car. Meanwhile, the seller was hanging out at neighbor's house, so she might have had the binoculars out watching.
Classic.
That tends to happen, especially with Nest cameras these days.
I was in a showing yesterday, and the neighbor's like this, like through the window, and I made eye contact, and she just didn't stop. She's just like this. And I'm like, okay, hey, like, I don't know.
You never know who's watching or listening.
I know. Hey, that's a good point. To just jump in here.
Yeah.
You never know who's watching you. And I tell my clients this all the time, the Nest things, the dog cameras, whatever, you got to be careful what you say. Yeah. Because I had it happen last year where somebody was like, hey, I know that this buyer is willing to pay whatever it was, $650,000, because they told their realtor in front of the Ring doorbell, and the realtor goes, no, we're coming in at 6:30. There goes your hand right there. You might as well just, you know what I mean? Sorry. So, okay. So the other sellers, or somebody's creeping from across the street.
That's what I think. I don't know. I never saw her, but
right.
So anyways, so I walk into the house with the wife. The husband forgets his mask. I'm like, go get your mask, man, right? Yeah. Because you don't know who's watching. He goes, gets his mask as I'm walking in. So it's a multi-level split. For those of you who don't know what a multi-level split is, when you walk in, you got the stairs up, you got the stairs down. So you got the little entryway. A lot of times a garage on the either side. You go up to the living room, you can go down to the basement from the entrance, and then once you're up there, you got the kitchen, the dining, and you can also go up another set of stairs to where the bedrooms and, upstairs bathroom kind of thing is. So in this particular property, you walk in the entrance, you got stairs up to the living room, you got stairs down to the basement, and where the garage was, that garage had been converted to extra living space. So it's actually like, I don't know, like a 2-3 inch drop down, but it was the same hardwood floor, so it kind of got camouflaged a bit.
Oh no.
So I'm walking in, she takes off her shoes. Like I mentioned earlier, she was a bit, older, sweet lady, and they were okay with the stairs. I asked them, I said, look, are you sure? And they said, no problem. So okay. So she walks in and takes her shoes off, takes another step forward, doesn't notice that there's a drop.
Oh no.
She catches her foot on it. And this, I'll make a little good humor out of it, but in all seriousness, it wasn't a funny situation at the time. But she falls ever so slowly after tripping on that little gap. And any slower, man, I swear I could have caught her.
Oh no.
And she smashes her head on the coffee table and literally like just in shock, right? And then there's blood that really like starts coming out fast. So I'm thinking this poor lady, I'm trying to get the husband to come in. Meanwhile, I'm thinking about the seller that was like
across the street.
Nobody put a wrinkle in my bed, let alone blood all over the floor. So I run up, the husband comes in, she's freaking out, of course. I'm getting paper towel, I'm cleaning it up, I'm trying to console her. Actually, you know what? The husband, while I'm there with her, did a quick little run around the house to make sure you could see it, which I thought was a bit, but things are, anyway. Honey,
you'll be fine. Like, you're probably just concussed. I'll just, I got to check the house out quick.
Anyway. So
oh my God.
I'm, clean up the blood. We hang out for a bit. She's, she's conscious. She's okay. Kind of not necessarily okay. So they followed me. I brought them to the hospital. The husband and I weren't allowed in because it was COVID. Yeah. So she had gone in. I went and got her some ice from like the receptionist. And then I ended up sitting with the husband outside for a bit. I left. I went back a few hours later. They were still there. And then I followed up a few days later just to see what ended up happening. And I come in touch a couple times, but she actually ended up getting a concussion and breaking her neck.
Oh my gosh.
So terrible situation. I kept in touch with them. I don't think they're buying in the area anymore, but she seems to be doing better now. Her spirits are good. And I started going around telling some buddies after it that my new slogan is I sell houses at neck breaking speed.
Oh my God.
So I don't know if that's cold. I had a lot of compassion for them. I kept in touch with them. But
that's so tough, man. Like nothing can prepare you for that situation. Like you're not a doctor, Jesus.
Sometimes you feel like it though. You're dealing with all these personalities, and there's a lot of.
Sometimes you're a marriage counselor. Sometimes you're. You gotta wear several different hats. I was just looking up. I wrote down a bunch of stories I had. It was funny actually. I wrote down a story last week, and I was like, I'm going to tell this one. I kick it to the other guy, and the guy starts telling the story, and it's the same. We're talking about the same house. Where somebody had passed away in the house like months before, and they had to like rip the entire house apart. And I've never smelled anything like that in my life, but nothing can prepare you for that, right? We had one. I don't know. We had one deal this year where, so there's chattels in the agreement, right? And you can only describe so many things. But anything that's like affixed to the property is technically supposed to stay, which is like even including TV mounts, which technically, I mean, they never really stay, but they should. We had a seller this year. Our buyers were buying the property, and the sellers removed every single plant in the garden, all of the gardens, took all the plants out. So they went to do a walkthrough, and there was just like 100 plants in the garage. They're like, what do we do about this? I'm like, honestly, I'm not sure. This is the first time this happened. We had a seller one time remove all of the light switch or all the light fixtures from the house, which is usually included, but wasn't sure what to do there either. But
it's kind of some of those gray areas. You don't deal with that often. Most people are pretty good, but when you see something like plants missing, I don't think I'd know what to do either.
Well, and like okay, so here's another one. Talking about interesting chattels. I sold a house one time that had a chicken coop, and I actually wasn't really sure when we listed it what was going to happen with the chickens when we sold it. Like, would people be interested in it, whatever. So, like, in the agreement, it literally said all associated chickens. Okay, so I was like, okay, cool. They had a lot. It was maybe like 17 to 20 chickens, and so like I get a call from the seller, and we're maybe like a week or two away from closing, and she's like, I don't know what to do. I know that we had a good laugh about associated chickens being included, but a fisher got into the chicken coop last night, and they're all gone. Like it's a bloodbath in there. So I'm like, all right, cool, well, whatever. Like they're just chickens. Like they don't cost a lot of money. I think it's like $5 for a chick or whatever. So I called the buyer's agent. I'm like, hey, like, just to let you know, there was a massacre at this chicken coop last night. What do you guys want to do? And she's like, I don't know. Like, she kind of laughs it off, calls her buyers, calls me back, and she's like, we want them replaced. We want all new chickens. So I literally find myself negotiating chickens because I didn't realize there's like certain types of chickens, expensive, not. So my girl went out and she thought it would be great to buy like 4 or 5 of these really expensive. I think they're like $40 or $50 chicks. And she's like, yeah, it's going to be great. They're all these amazing chickens, whatever. And they go to do their walkthrough and they're like, there's not enough. And she's like, well, I spent way more money than my chickens costed, and here we are. Anyway, so for like 4 or 5 different phone calls, here I am negotiating. I almost had to negotiate money off the price about these chickens. Like the things that you see in some of these deals, like literally nothing can prepare you for.
I love it. The associated chickens.
The associated chickens, dude.
So it makes it sound a little bit more,
Yeah. So and going into it's always funny, like we get these crazy stories, and then I'm like, how can we transition this back into like a regular conversation? So talking about weird things happening in deals, we're starting to see conditions and stuff, and in properties, and obviously the market's changing. But you and I had a pretty good conversation. You had a couple of good analogies I thought we should cover. The one thing you were saying was like talking about people saying, "Oh, the prices are coming down. I'm going to wait. The prices are coming down." But when the mortgage rates are going up, what's your month? Like your monthly payment is all you should look at. Not necessarily what the purchase price is. Like that's what it's actually costing you every month. So the analogy you used was, what was it, $1 million home versus like an 800?
Yeah, and so this is an analogy watching a video last night. So I remember it. There might be a couple details, but rough numbers. Nonetheless, whole concept of it is what matters. So let's say you have $1 million home, because we think about prices going down, and a lot of buyers are becoming more patient, more prudent, and more picky, unless they're maybe military or something else where they need to buy, or they need to purchase something before the kids are in school, or they already sold. Right. Anyway, if you take a look at with rates going up, $1 million home a few months ago, let's say February, so $1 million home, 20% down payment, 2.5% interest rate, it works out to be about $3,500 in a monthly expense. You compare that to an $800,000 purchase with 20% down, with a 5% interest rate, which is more or less where rates are at now. The average expense is closer to $3,900 a month. So, I mean, of course, I know what some of you might be thinking is the down payment, a difference between, 20% on 800 versus 20% on $1 million is $40,000. So, I mean, yeah, that's considerable. But you know, it's the cheaper house at today's rates is actually about $400 more expensive. And I think you're talking about analogies. One of them, you know, as an agent who's been in the business now just about 3 years, but kind of been around it since I was a little kid, is, you know, the conversations we're having with clients and sellers is a big one. Because before it was always, you know, do we buy first, do we sell first? And in a strong seller's market, it's like, okay, we're going to buy now because we don't want to sell first and then lose out in competition, be desperate and buy something we don't really want. So as long as we're realistic about our sale price, we're going to buy first, then we're going to sell.
Because it was easier to sell than it was to buy. Right?
And it might take, you know, 4 or 5 days and you'll get probably way over asking as long as it's priced the way that
it should be.
And then, you know, now it's to people, well, you don't want to buy first because then if your house takes long to sell, first of all, you don't know how long it'll take. You don't know for what price. So when people buy first and they most need the proceeds from their sale, that can get them in a desperate situation, end up taking a lot less than they otherwise might have got for it. So the two ways around this are purchasing a place with a condition on the sale of the buyer's property, which a lot of sellers still don't want, but if it sits on the market longer, they'll say, okay, we'll take it. Or you put it your house up first and you ask for a seller accommodation condition, which means from the time you get an accepted offer, you ask that buyer to put in a condition to the benefit of the seller to allow maybe 7 days or 14 days for them to go find something that's suitable for them. If they do, at which time they firm up. If they don't, then the deal's dead. So I kind of, you know, as a hockey player, you know, till I was 25 competitively, it was kind of, I relate a lot of things back to hockey for me to better, you know, wrap my head around it. It's kind of like, you know, from an agent in the last couple of years to an agent today, like even the change from what we've seen the last few months, it's kind of like, you know, almost like being a goalie in hockey. And then all of a sudden you're a defenseman or you're a forward now. Like it's a completely different conversation, strategies.
100%. Completely, yeah. And so, and there's pros and cons to both of those methods too, because SPP, like in conditional sale of the purchaser's property, most of those conditions have an escape clause. So now it's like, you know, you got to get your property on the market as soon as possible. Try to get it, you know, listed and sold ASAP. Otherwise, somebody could come in and push you out if they have no conditions or whatever, depending on the wording of that condition. And the other way around, a lot of times, like getting a seller's accommodations clause where they get to go shopping and they have, like you said, 7 days to go find a house or whatever it is. It's harder to get the most amount of money in that condition, in that way, because now that buyer has to sit there with no certainty either. So the buyer's sitting there, you know, hoping and praying that you're going to go find a property too, right? So, but this is where I think like good agents come into play. And all right, so this is where I think good agents come into play though, and why it's important to have a good agent, because you have to be creative in this business, right? There's so many things, all the things that we just talked about, but you need a good agent that knows what they're talking about and can be creative in order to create a win-win situation. So, man, I appreciate you coming on. And why don't you throw out like your social media, your phone number, whatever else you want to throw out for people to find you in that area. Throw out your areas again, and then how people can track you down.
So as far west as Brighton, we also do Quinte West, which is also referred to as Trenton, and Belleville. And you can just Google my name, Brandon O'Quinn. You can find my number, my email, anything like that. Also social media on Instagram. It's Brandon O'Quinn 17. So anybody needs anything from me, you know where to find me.
All right. All right. Thanks, brother.
Appreciate it.
And we wrap every episode up by saying, here we grow.